I'd now like to introduce Paul Spencer, who is also on the Board of Advisors of the Future of California Elections from Disability Rights California. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. I'm Paul Spencer. I'm a staff attorney with Disability Rights California. Thank you, Secretary Padilla, for opening up this event. Appreciate it. It's funny, I mean, things are moving fast. We have, as you said, we have 3 big things next year. And even stranger, we have major presidential candidates in Fresno. I might need to contact the campaign for some tips on how to get to Fresno. There's only 1 flight in there a day. I don't know if anybody else struggles. You have to drive, I guess. So, part of my work is, I'm working to make sure that voting is accessible for people with disabilities. And one of the best practices we're always encouraging counties across the state to do is to incorporate accessibility planning into everything they do. The one really interesting thing about the Voters' Choice Act is it requires a lot of these best practices. You have to have committees for voters with disabilities. You need to get input from people with disabilities on your election planning. So in LA County, they've long done these best practices before it's even required. So they've been really good about incorporating comments from the disability community on their election planning, and especially on the voting equipment, which my next speaker is going to talk about. So, Dean Logan, he is the Registrar-Recorder County Clerk for Los Angeles County, California, the nation's largest, most diverse, and complex local election jurisdiction, serving more than 5.2 million registered voters. He currently serves as president of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials and the Pew Center on the state's voter registration modernization and performance index for elections working groups. He's an active participant in the Future of California Elections Collaborative and serves on the board of directors for the National Election Center. Mr. Logan holds a bachelor's degree in organizational leadership from Azusa Pacific University and earned an executive master's degree in public administration through the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington. So I'd like to invite Mr. Logan to come up. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Okay, you can do better than that. Good morning, everybody. Okay. Thank you, Paul, for that introduction. It's great to be here and to see a room full of people that are here committed to improving the voter experience for the 5.2 million existing voters and the potential of another million eligible but unregistered voters in Los Angeles County. So I just want to start out by saying how encouraging it is to spend a day at a room full of people who are committed to something that I think is just so fundamentally important. Paul, thank you for the introduction. One of the great things about this, and I'll talk about partnership a lot in my remarks this morning, but is the people you get to meet in doing this work, the collaboration and stuff that goes along with that. And I find myself frequently having to take day trips up to Sacramento because I have to testify at a hearing or go have meetings in the Secretary of State's office. And one of my great experiences was flying into Sacramento for a meeting and making that long walk out to where the Ubers and Lyfts are, and there was Paul. So we were able to collaborate in an Uber drive to our Capitol meeting. So so please know that's an open invitation. If you see me on a plane to Sacramento and you're headed to a meeting, hit me up and we can ride together and do some work together. So I want to start first by thanking the Democracy Fund and the James Irvine Foundation for their commitment to this work, both in terms of today's event, but just in general terms, the focus that they've put on improving the voter experience, not just with regard to the Democracy Fund, not just with regard to California, but across the nation. They're doing some amazing work, and we're just very excited that they have taken an interest in the model that's happening here in California and using their platform as a way to share this type of collaboration and have that expand throughout the country. Also want to thank Rosalind and everybody who's here from the Future California Elections Collaborative. I was trying to remember, Rosalind, I believe our first kickoff meeting for FOS happened right here at the endowment, and so much has happened since we started that process. And I say this frequently, but I can't emphasize it enough, that model of collaboration, of bringing together people with disparate interest in some respect, but a common interest in the importance and the significance of voting, coming together to work on solutions in a collaborative way. And I joke often that it used to be decades ago, it used to be when we as registrars of voters or government officials would meet with these organizations, it often would be in a courtroom, and we would be on opposite sides of the room in front of a judge, arguing over what was administratively possible and what was legally required. And I'm very pleased to say that over the last decade, since we came together in California in a collaborative approach, we've really minimized that dynamic, and instead we're sitting at tables together, at round tables like these, talking about what are the issues are, what are the administrative challenges, but what are the compliance issues, and how can we achieve those things together. So again, today is just a perfect example of that. So thank you so much for everybody for participating in that. I want to get into talking a little bit about the Voters' Choice Act and about LA County's particular version of that, because we are, as always, we're a little bit different here in LA County than the rest of the state, and I want to make some of those distinctions. But I wanted to sort of set the context a little bit at the beginning of this, and just to think about what's kind of led to where we are today. And I was thinking back to my time in LA County, and there are some pivotal election moments that hopefully I can share with you that will provide you a little bit of illustration of why this work has been so important and why we've been intentionally patient and persistent in the manner in which we've done this here in LA County and in California. So one of those moments is back in the 2016 presidential primary. So as you will recall, or maybe I just recall it too much because it still haunts me and I when I'm trying to sleep. We had substantial interest here in California, which was a good thing. There was a lot of energy around the 2016 presidential primary. Initially, it was not believed that California would have much influence in the nomination of either of the party nominees in 2016, but as things progressed, there was definitely a competitive race going into that particular primary. And California has interesting rules for presidential primaries that don't necessarily correspond really well with the rules that we have for voting. So in order to get the right ballot in a presidential primary, you have to either be registered with the political party of the candidate that you want to support, or if you are not registered with a political party, the political parties get to decide whether or not you can participate in their presidential primary. So it's very complex from an administrative standpoint, and it's very confusing from a voter standpoint. You know, a voter, especially a new voter who's coming into the process for the first time, who has become engaged and now believes that the power of their vote has the ability to influence who will get the nomination for one of the major party candidates for president of the United States, shows up at a polling place only to discover that they're not registered with the party for that particular candidate, or they're registered without a party and the party they want to vote for isn't allowing no party preference voters to vote for them. So what happened that day was a lot of frustration on the part of poll workers, a lot of frustration on the part of new voters, new entrants, young voters who had become engaged in that campaign and in that particular presidential contest. And to a fairly significant degree, as I reflect back on it, we systematically, systematically failed them in that experience. We drove them we educated them on the importance of voting, why voting was critical to our democratic process, to our representative form of government. We pushed them to get engaged, and then they showed up to have a voting experience that didn't meet that, right? Because they either were turned away because they couldn't vote for the candidate they wanted to, or they weren't given proper information to understand why they couldn't get the ballot they wanted to. So that's one example. I'll try to tie these together in a second. Then fast forward to June of 2018, in the state primary here in California, and here in LA County, we had a data issue where the paper rosters of voters that were distributed to our 5,000 polling places on election day, which was really the key to successful election administration. It turned out that there were voters who were active voters, regular voters who had voted in many elections, whose names did not get printed in those rosters due to a compatibility issue between our database and the state database, which I won't go into all the details around that. It wasn't exciting or dramatic. It was a data issue. But again, that meant that we had a lot of people who were showing up at polling places ready to take that act, to have their voice heard, only to be left with the feeling, wondering, am I registered and will my vote be cast? So again, systemically, not meeting the bar that ought to be placed ahead of that. And then third, I will reflect back on Tuesday of this week. So we had an election here in LA County in about a little less than 1,000 precincts, LA Unified School District, a state Senate vacancy in the Long Beach area, LA City Council vacancy. And again, administratively, that election operated fairly well, but I can tell you that I sat in on phone calls and engaged with voters who, even though the turnout in that election was dismally low, who, because it was a special election on a date where people wouldn't predict that there was an election, where they might not know about it, they went to the polling place that they went to in the 2018 election, only to find that that wasn't their polling place in the special vacancy election. Or they went to a polling place and discovered that we had them listed as having received a vote by mail ballot that they either didn't believe that they requested or that they didn't receive, and were forced to vote a provisional ballot in order to vote in that election. So I share all those from my experience as an election administrator. There's a lot that goes into conducting an election in a jurisdiction like LA County. And we have a lot of safeguards in place. So we had safeguards in place to address the roster issue in June of 2018. And we had provisional ballots available for those voters that went to the wrong polling place on Tuesday. And that's a good thing because those votes will ultimately be counted. What that doesn't provide for, that fail-safe method doesn't provide for a voter experience that lives up to the significance that you all talk about in voter registration drives and that I talk about when I talk to people about why voting is so important. I share those stories with you because that really forms the foundation of how we got to where we are today in Los Angeles County. The Voting Solutions for All People initiative in LA County has really been in the works for over a decade. Some of you in this room will see yourselves in some of these pictures. We started this shortly after the 2008 election, and we started it based on a couple of things. One, we knew that the voting system that we have here, the infrastructure that we use to conduct elections in LA County was at the end of its life cycle. We also knew it didn't have the technical capacity to adapt to changes in voter behavior, to adapt to changes in technology, to adapt to changes in regulations, and that if we didn't do something fairly soon in Los Angeles County, that we were going to be left with a voting system that was unable to conduct an election in the largest jurisdiction in the country. We also knew, because we started out, for those of you who were involved at that point, VSAP at that time stood for Voting Systems Assessment Project, because we were trying to assess what we needed in LA County. And one of the first things that we did in that assessment was to do a market scan to find out, so what's available? We are legally limited to operating with a certified voting system, a voting system that had been certified by the Secretary of State, tested and certified by the Secretary of State. In partnership with the City of LA, we had participated in a request for bid to see if there was a system on the market that could meet the needs of LA County, and the answer was there wasn't. We're larger, this county, we have more voters than 42 of the states have in the nation statewide. So people don't design and build voting systems for a jurisdiction this size. We're considered high risk, and it's complicated. So there's a whole market out there of medium and small size counties that they can market those systems to. So basically, we found ourselves in a situation where we needed to replace our voting system, but there wasn't anything available on the market that was certified to replace it. So we made a bold decision in LA County at that time. We decided, and again, without getting into too much detail, that was also a time where the regulatory environment around elections was incredibly dysfunctional. The federal agency that oversees voting system standards was defunct because they didn't have commissioners. That was mired in partisan debate in Congress. Here in the state of California, the voting systems that had replaced punch card voting systems across most of the state had been decertified by the Secretary of State, and most counties had actually defaulted back to their older voting systems. And there was very little being done out there in the market in terms of development of new systems. It was really sort of a patchwork, make this work and stay in place. So we made the bold decision that if we had to start from the ground up What if we looked at voting systems from a different perspective? What if instead of looking at this as a system problem or a technology problem, what if we looked at it first from the voter experience standpoint and say, okay, if we're going to invest a sizable amount of public dollars and time and resources into completely revamping the voting system in LA County, what if we put the voters first in that equation and started from a grassroots standpoint? So we started by having meetings. We brought people together. We engaged with voters in focus groups and in workshops and gathered a lot of data about what do people like about their current voting experience? What is it that they find significant and validating about that experience? And we also asked, what is it that you don't like about that voting experience? What are the limitations of the voting system that we have today that you would like us to address going forward? We didn't stop there, though. We went and talked to people who were eligible but not registered to vote. Said, so what is it about the voting environment, the infrastructure of voting, that keeps you from wanting to participate in the process? Because we recognize that there are a lot of things that contribute to whether a person votes or not. Those things that we have control over, things like the time, place, and equipment that are used for voting, are only one piece of that puzzle. But they're an important piece because of what I said earlier. They're the important piece that says if a voter shows up for the first time, if we don't make that a meaningful experience, the likelihood of them coming back and voting in the next election goes down significantly. So we reached out to those folks. We reached out to young people and said, you're the future electorate of LA County. What are your expectations? How is it through the infrastructure and the environment in which we administer elections that we can meet you where you are so that when you are eligible, that you will participate in the process and that you will recognize the importance of that. We took all of that data and then we this is a little bit of a leap of faith, but that's what you do when you're in a situation where there's nothing to buy, and so you say, let's try something different. And we took a human-centered approach to this, and we engaged with a world-class organization called IDEO to take all of that data and through a series of workshops with unprecedented engagement in our community to design a voting experience, not a voting system, but a voter experience for LA County that was designed with and for the voters of Los Angeles County. That's when we moved from a voting systems assessment project to what we now refer to as voting solutions for all people. In parallel with that, that is also when the Secretary of State and registrars across the county and advocates like you were also involved in looking at this model of voting that was taking place in Colorado. And it turns out that was a really good parallel with the research that we had gathered during the VSAP project. So the combination of those two things has led us to where we sit here today, where beginning in March of 2020, we will roll out the new Voting Solutions for All People model of voting in Los Angeles County, and that will be done under the guides and the regulations associated with the Voters' Choice Act. Important in both of those things is that the voter is the focus there. The voter experience in terms of VSAP and the voter's choice in terms of the Voters' Choice Act. So what does that mean? So that means that come March of 2020, different than what we experienced on Tuesday and in June of 16 and June of 18, that a voter will no longer be limited to a single day, a single location, and a single piece of equipment to cast their ballot in LA County. Instead, we will begin opening vote centers, full-service vote centers, 11 days prior to Election Day, and any voter in LA County can go to any vote center in Los Angeles County. And if they're not registered to vote, or if there's a problem with their voter registration, they can register to vote or update their voter registration on site at that location. If we show that they were registered, that they had been mailed a vote by mail ballot and they don't have that vote by mail ballot to surrender, or they claim they never received it or never requested it, we can clear that on site and issue them a regular ballot at that voting location. If they show up and they are registered with a party other than the party of the candidate that they want to vote for in the presidential primary in March, they can re-register with that party and cast a regular ballot for the nominee that they are seeking to participate in. A fundamental change in the process of what we've done. So it allows us to address those issues that we've been wrestling with for decades. Issues that we've addressed through fail-safe methods like provisional ballots that end up being counted, but that leave a voter with a question in their mind about whether or not they were eligible, whether they were treated fairly, and whether or not their ballot will be counted. So that's what the Voters' Choice Act is all about, is that combination of opportunities to vote by mail, opportunities to vote in person, but to do that over a period of time, 11 days. We'll start at 11 days, 4 days before the election. We will significantly increase the number of those vote centers throughout the county, so it will be more densely distributed throughout the community. And we will also be adding a significant number of vote-by-mail drop-off locations. So one of the things we learned in our data collection is that voters, a significant number of our voters, different than the rest of the state of California, but about a third of our voters in LA County really prefer and value receiving their ballot in the mail, but they really like to turn that ballot into a ballot box rather than sending it back through the mail. So two things that we changed as a result of that. One is we eliminated the postage required to return the ballot, but we also now have vote-by-mail drop-off locations, and those will increase in March. So you can take those vote-by-mail ballots and drop them in a drop-off box throughout the county. That's the Voters' Choice Act model. What's a little different in LA County is in other counties across the state that have adopted this model, they're doing this as every voter in their county will receive a vote-by-mail ballot, and then they have the option of also going to a vote center. In LA County, we're not doing that, at least not initially. The way the law was written in LA County, any voter can still opt into vote-by-mail, so we still have the ability to market vote-by-mail as an option, but we will not automatically mail a vote-by-mail ballot to every voter. Instead, we have a higher threshold for vote centers. So we will have more densely populated vote centers throughout Los Angeles County for that in-person voting experience. The other thing that's different is that what will be in those vote centers will be this new voter experience that we've created through the Voting Solutions for All People, and you have the opportunity today to see components of that. I'll highlight a few of those things. One is the key piece of equipment that is there that will be available to all voters is the ballot marking device. And the ballot marking device is a piece of equipment that allows a voter to make their choices, interact with a touchscreen, but it prints out a paper, human-readable ballot that is the official ballot of record, and that comes back and is tabulated centrally. So it allows for that tangible human-readable ballot that can be audited, that can be recounted, but it also eliminates things like the ambiguity of how somebody marks a ballot. So then if we have a recount, we're not sitting there debating what was the voter's intent. If they circled 3 of the names and then drew a square around the 4th name, which sounds silly, but when you get paper and pencil, they do a lot of interesting things. So the ballot marking device also addresses issues that date way back to things we discovered in the 2000 presidential election that led to the elimination of punch card voting. So the ballot device will not let you overvote in a race. If you can only vote for one in a contest, it's only going to let you vote for one in a contest. It will alert you if you have left a contest blank. We recognize some voters choose to skip contests, but it will alert them to that and give them the opportunity to correct that. Perhaps most importantly in LA County, and probably one of the highest sources of pride for us, is that ballot marking device was designed for all voters. So if you're a voter with a disability, you're no longer faced with a polling place where there's one piece of equipment that's available for you that will take you 3, 4, 5 times longer than every other voter to vote, that generally poll workers in some cases don't even plug in because they don't want to deal with it because it's complicated and they don't know how it works. This device, every device in the vote center is designed with accessibility features. So accessibility features that range from the tilt of the screen. So if you're in a wheelchair, you can pull up to the device and you can tilt the screen so you can see it. If you need to increase the size of the font or the contrast on the screen, you can do that. If you want to read the ballot on the touch screen but also hear it audibly, you can do that with the headphones. If you want to only hear it audibly and use a tactile keypad to mark your ballot, it can black out the screen for privacy's sake and allow you to use the accessibility features. So the accessibility features, I'm biased, but of this particular device, I think exceed anything that's been available in this country for voting in the past. And that the credit for that really doesn't go to us or to our design firm. It really goes to the people in the community that we worked with in designing this. And one of the greatest moments for me was the ability, and I see Terry Lance here, who has been a part of our working group since day one. We went out and spent time at the Cerebral Palsy Center of LA County in the early stages of the design of this, when we just had foam board cutouts and talked to voters with diverse and extreme disabilities about their voting experience. And it was a very moving experience for me, because we had a room full of people who were registered voters, engaged voters who had voted in every election, but to a person told us that they had never been able to vote a secret ballot, because they had always had to rely on either a poll worker or a family member or a caregiver to come in to help them mark their ballot. Yet they're engaged, they're involved, they wanted to participate in the elections. They could not do that independently. We came back at the last phase of our design project when we had a prototype of this device, and we were able to watch those same voters sit at the device that you can see in the back of the room and cast a ballot independently without anybody else having to see how they voted or without anybody else having to intervene on their behalf. And literally, and this is one thing, if you've ever done that, it's hard, because you have to resist that urge to say, I want to jump in and show them how to do it. But we actually stood back and said, the instructions are on the screen, here's your ballot, this is how it works. And it was quite fascinating to see both the capacity of the equipment, the capacity of the voters, but probably most important, the emotional satisfaction that came from that ability to deliver that voting experience. So accessibility will be available for all on every device. For another big issue in Los Angeles County is language access. In today's environment, we address language access in a number of ways. We engage and employ multilingual poll workers to provide assistance at our polling places. And we also provide a translation guide that is attached to each voter booth, which means if you're a voter who doesn't speak English or who has limited English proficiency, you have to have two sets of the ballot pages, the English set and the translated set, and you have to interpret that in marking your ballot. The voting device, the ballot marking device that's part of the VSAP solution, allows you from your first engagement to select language and to have the fully translated ballot in any language on any device presented to you visually on the screen, presented to you audibly. If you want to listen to the ballot in a language other than English, but read it in English, you have the ability to do that. You can customize that to your own experience. If you want to toggle back and forth, and I look at Deanna because she helped us in particular with this particular issue. One of the things we learned from voters in LA County is that there are a lot of limited English speaking voters who have no problem navigating the contest. They recognize the office titles, they recognize the names of the candidates. But when you get to a general election that has 10 statewide ballot initiatives that address significant policy issues, that can be very confusing even for the most English proficient voters. So the ability for a voter to toggle and to hear that ballot measure, to read or hear that ballot measure in their language of choice, again, is something that has not been able to be offered in the past and now will be available to all voters on all devices. And again, through their own selections. They aren't gonna have to go ask for special assistance for that. It's gonna be part of that voting experience for them. There are other components that you'll get a chance to see that address things like recognizing the emerging population of voters, young voters. We learned very, very well during our data collection that look, we're all tied to those mobile devices that run our lives, right? And there's a lot of discussion that comes up around security, but what about internet voting? When are we going to have the ability to vote on your mobile device? And again, it's interesting when you take the time to listen to people and to gather that data, we make a lot of assumptions. I think early on there was an assumption that the driver for the ability to use your phone to vote would be coming from young people. It's interesting, what we learned in our process is it wasn't really the young people who were saying that, because the young people understand how to manipulate that device. And so they would tell us, young voters would say, you don't want people voting on these phones because we know what we could do with them. It was really actually the emerging baby boomer generation who has adapted to the use of the devices and the convenience of the devices. They're saying, I'm doing everything else on this device, why can't I vote on it? So that was just an interesting learning experience. So in case I've made you nervous by that, we are not voting on our cell phones. We're not doing internet voting. We are voting on the voting device, and it's a paper ballot. But what we have developed is an interactive sample ballot. So in addition to the paper sample ballot that you get in the mail, we will now make available and it's optional, nobody has to use this, but an electronic sample ballot that a voter can interact with before they go to the vote center, that they can use that to actually pre-mark their selections and create a QR code, take that QR code with them, scan it into the ballot marking device, and it'll pre-populate their choices. They can change them, they can change their mind, they can review them, and print out their ballot, and that ballot goes into the ballot box. So it provides an opportunity for an expedited voting experience and also opens up kind of a whole new world for us to engage with voters during that pre-election period. So really the crux of all this is our philosophy that developed over the course of this project was to meet voters where they are. Instead of having people have to come out and seek out a polling place or voter information on their own, we want to be visible in the community. We want those vote centers to be located in places so that when people are out visiting a farmer's market on the weekend before the election, they're going to see, oh, there's a vote center right here. I could go in and cast my ballot today if I wanted to, or I could go register to vote, or I can take my friends with me and make it a social experience. So I wanted to set that context for you because I think it's important as we get into the nitty-gritty of how we do implementation and how this moves forward. It's important, I think, to know how this happened and how it was built. And it really is about the voter experience. That's the part of this that I think is most exciting. The challenge, of course, is we live in a jurisdiction with 5.4 million registered voters. And many of those voters, especially those who are active voters who have voted all of their adult life, are used to the way that they voted in the past. They're used to going to the polling place that they're familiar with, and they're used to doing that on Tuesday between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. So there are a couple of different things that are really incumbent on all of us as partners in this to emphasize. One is to recognize that this is an opportunity for us to expand the electorate. It is an opportunity to recognize that the old system, we know from data, did not successfully match the demographics of our community. There were voters that weren't being served by the old system, where it didn't work to go to a neighborhood polling place close to your home on a random Tuesday between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. And those are the voters we want to invite into the process, right? We want to expand the electorate, not just in terms of numbers, but also in its representation of the demographics of the community that we serve. This offers us the opportunity to do that if we can educate them and get them familiar with this process. So first thing, together, as I would say, what I would say from a boot camp standpoint is let's emphasize that. Let's look for ways to engage people who are eligible, who are registered or could be registered, and get them out in ways that we haven't been able to do before. Secondly, we need to respect and honor those who have actively and consistently participated in our elections. I'm going to be honest with you, we know from the data that's out there that while there may be some pushback from our long-term consistent voters saying, wait a second, I always went to that particular polling place and I don't want to change, we know from the data that they're going to vote anyway, right? They're going to overcome time, place, and equipment. But that doesn't mean that we should disrespect that. We need to respect and honor the role that they've played in the electoral process and bring them with us, just like we would any other change in our community. And finally, we need to build a base of support or a baseline of how to measure this and how to tell the story of what the implementation of this new model of voting is. While I would love to wake up the day after the March election and just ring a bell and say this was a huge success, that our population distributed themselves evenly across 11 days of voting, that they voted at high numbers and that there were no issues, realistically, that's not going to happen. This is a significant change. It's a heavy lift for our community, and it's not all going to happen in that first election cycle. We know from counties who adopted this in 2018 that those first few days in that 11-day period are going to be there's not going to be a lot of activity. A lot of voters are going to still wait till Tuesday because that's what they're familiar with. And as a result of that, we're going to have to address capacity issues because we could end up with lines on Tuesday. That doesn't mean that in April, we go back and shift back to a Tuesday-only system, or that we reduce that 11-day period. We need to together gather data and follow this through a few cycles and educate the public so they do adapt to a system that was built to adapt to them. If you can follow me on that. I mean, so that really is the crux of this, is that this was designed by and for voters of LA County. That doesn't mean they're aware of it. We are all functions of our memory and our patterns and our habits. And it's going to take a huge effort to educate the public about this, to engage them in ways that gets them familiar with where the voting locations are, that gets them comfortable with the equipment and the experience that they're going to have when they go to those vote centers, and that gives them the confidence that their ballot is going to be counted as they intended for it to be counted. And that's what this partnership is all about. This process has only worked because we've done it in partnership with communities. We early on established a community stakeholder advisory committee and a technical advisory committee that brought to us experts in demographic issues, in voting rights issues, in security and privacy issues. That was all part of the design phase. Now we need to take that and build a coalition of the people who are here so that we can reach out in the community and be sure everybody is aware of this. We have, in the last 2 months, our office alone has been at 150 meetings in the community, talking to people primarily about where to locate these vote centers, getting feedback on what would be meaningful locations. Again, I'm sure people in this room can appreciate, again, great learnings from that, because we've talked to voters who tell us, well, I think a vote center ideally ought to be in a city hall, because that represents government to me. It seems like it's a place of significance, and that's meaningful to me when I cast my vote. In that same room, we hear from other voters who say, no, I don't want this at a city hall because there's a police station attached to that city hall, and I don't want to feel like government is impacting my voting experience. I want to go to somewhere in my community where I recognize the people, that they look like me, they talk like me, I can engage with them, I can have an experience with them. That's the beauty of the Voters' Choice Act model, is we can address both of those needs. We can provide vote centers that are in city halls for those people who want that dynamic. We can provide vote centers in community centers and in areas in the community like a farmer's market or something to that effect. But again, we can't do that unless we get the feedback from people about where are those places. So we've been out in the community having those meetings. We're getting great feedback. There are several more of those throughout the month of June. We have information in the back so you can be informed on that. Many of your organizations have been great partners in that process, and we're continually learning and increasing our method. We will be having in September a countywide mock election where we will open up vote centers in not a real election, but an opportunity and to encourage people to come in and see what the vote center is going to be like, to touch and feel the equipment and get familiar with it. So getting the word out about that and getting enough people to come in to kind of generate some buzz on social media and out in the community about that is going to be particularly important. I wanted to touch on the questions about the census. That's a great opportunity to partner with the efforts going on in the census in the county too, and we are doing that. So we hope in those mock election centers to also be able to promote information about the census. Then from September through the end of the year, we will have a traveling demonstration centers that will go throughout the community and be available for people to learn about this. But we're going to need your help to get that word out and to remind us and educate us on how to reach into those communities that often don't get the word through the traditional means. And so that's what we hope will be accomplished through today's session. So again, I thank you so much for your partnership in this. I think this is a very exciting time for Los Angeles County. I think we are going to have a very successful election and implementation in March of 2020 because of the partnerships. This is not something that we can do alone. It requires the partnership of government, advocacy, community organizations, and the voters themselves in order for this to be successful. And we're committed to making that happen and look forward to your input. So thank you very much. Questions? Thank you.
Well, thank you. That made it so easy. I've gotten a lot more efficient. Of that. I think, with the voter right for voters,
Sure.
we could work on cleaning some of that up so that we don't have a lot really just waste for folks who have either moved out of the state, county, whatever the case may be, or place. Just to look at that because that does impact our state.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate that feedback very much. Yes. So let me try and address that on a couple different ways, because that question does come up pretty regularly. First of all, on the vote by mail side, is if we show that, so if Dean Logan goes into a vote center and it shows that Dean Logan was issued a vote by mail ballot, in today's environment at a polling place, because you've got paper rosters, all we can do there is issue a provisional ballot unless they have that vote by mail ballot to surrender, which, by the way, is the largest number of provisional ballots in every election. Now at the vote center, we will have real-time access to the database and we can actually clear that vote by mail ballot. So it's not sitting out there. Even if I went home and cast it or mailed it back in, it would now show that I voted at a vote center. So there's a way to check that. The voter impersonation question is an interesting one. There's very little data to suggest that there is voter impersonation going on. I mean, this is no different than at polling places. We get asked that question too. As a policy matter, the state of California, and this has been debated many times, does not require voter identification at the time of voting. That's a legislative policy issue, not an administrative issue. But I can tell you that we have not seen any evidence of people doing that. And if you look at the turnout and the participation rates in LA County, I would say we have a bigger problem of getting people to vote at all, let alone putting themselves at risk of a felony to go and cast a ballot in the name of someone else. So just like they do today, a voter who goes to a vote center will have to present themselves. They'll have to say, this is my name and my address. The vote center worker will look them up. They will still sign an oath under penalty of perjury that they are who they say they are and that they have not cast a ballot, another ballot in this election. That's all evidentiary, so I mean, so if something did come up, we could pursue that, but it's not an issue, not just in California, but it's been studied nationwide, and there really has been very little. So that gets brought up a lot as a vulnerability of the system. I think there are many other things that are backed up by data that I think we need to address first. Hope that answered your question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, great question. So yes, our city clerks, and I should have said that in my remarks, our city clerks are incredibly important partners in this, because the other thing that's a little bit unique about LA County is that at the same time we're doing all this, many of our cities are now consolidating with our even year elections for the first time, where city elections have been separate before, and they're now going to be part of the March and the November ballots. So that partnership with city clerks is critical. The training of our vote center workers absolutely will engage with you on that. We would love the idea of using city clerks and their staff to actually be amongst the staff at our vote centers too. So there are a lot of opportunities to look at that. So Aaron's here. We'll take note of that and absolutely reach out to you in that regard. One of the things that I should probably share that's a little bit was even unique to us. So this is how much change there is going to be for voters. The other thing, just special here in LA County. The legislature passed a bill last year that also, starting in March of 2020, changes the order of the ballot in Los Angeles County, only in Los Angeles County. So now, March 2020 will be a presidential primary election, but the first contest you'll see on your ballot will be the local contest. And it'll move from local to state to federal and then to presidential. So the intention there, well-intentioned, is to recognize that local government is that closest to the citizen and to get that attention and to hopefully reduce the amount of drop-off of votes in local contests. But that's another piece that has to be part and parcel of our education program, because I think voters will be surprised by that if they're coming to vote for the first time because they've been inspired by a presidential candidate and then they don't see that presidential contest right away, that could be alarming. So we need to talk about that when we're doing the outreach, and Aaron and others on our team will be providing more information about that later. Yes, sir.
So you said in March, will that also be true, this location on the ballot, will that also be true in the November election, that local people will get the?
Yes, it will.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes.
Trying to discourage the use of mailing out ballots and move everyone to voting centers? Is that the
Yeah, so the question is, are we trying to discourage vote by mail and move people to vote centers? No, I would not say we're trying to discourage vote by mail. And I think what we're trying to do is provide voters with the options so they can choose the methodology that's most relevant to them. So we know it's an interesting dynamic, because so we have a third of our voters who are permanent vote by mail voters, which as a percentage of our electorate is smaller than the rest of the state, but it's more vote by mail ballots than anyone in the nation issues. So no, we will still maintain, and I think you all know that in 2018, that was the first phase of this project. We implemented our new vote by mail ballot. So I think we'll continue to see the number of vote by mail votes increase in LA County, but we also want to offer a more meaningful in-person voting experience. So if a voter desires to do that, that they have the ability to do that.
Why isn't everyone getting a vote by mail, and is there plan for future elections?
Yeah, so it's a couple of reasons for that. When the bill was passed, when the Voters' Choice Act was passed, it was passed with this provision for LA County, and I think that was for two reasons. One, because our percentage of vote by mail was already lower than the rest of the state. So we had 2/3 of our electorate who consistently does not use a vote by mail ballot, and I think there was concern about putting out on the street all of these blank ballots to voters who weren't familiar with that methodology of voting. Also, to be perfectly candid with you, no one in the country has ever administered a vote by mail ballot for 5.4 million registered voters. So the systems and the vendors, just in terms of printing and mail preparation, that would be an entirely new system and require an investment in infrastructure that doesn't exist. Now, the law was written to say that by 2024, then based on this model, that LA County would move to 100% vote by mail. I believe that we will, when the law was passed, there was no data around this model. A lot of it was speculation and looking at what happened in Colorado and kind of what was politically acceptable to get the bill passed. I think once we've had a couple of election cycles where we have data to show how many people are voting by mail, how many voters are voting at vote centers, I think there'll be some opportunity to go back and refine that in the law. So I think we'll know more about that after March and November. Yes. So the list of vote centers, we have, through our vote center placement project, we've identified 2,000 potential locations in the county. We're in the process now of doing assessments of those for accessibility, electrical, parking, all of those things. Once that's completed, we will score those and we'll prioritize where those locations are. Then we'll make that list public. I think from a compliance standpoint, late fall, we have to file our election administration plan, and that is one of the components of the election administration plan is the full list of vote centers. And then we have to have a public hearing on those. We will publish that list long before we do the election administration plan, but by late fall. Great question. So, and we would welcome your feedback on that. So all voters prior to the election will still receive a sample ballot. And as you all know, typically your sample ballot tells you where your voting place is. Well, now voters in LA County will have 1,000 options of places to vote. So sending them a catalog of a list of 1,000 locations is probably not the most efficient way to do that. So I think what we're looking at right now, and we have not made a firm decision on this, but I think that what we're likely to do is to, on the sample ballot, list the 3 vote centers that are closest to where the voter lives, both for the 11-day period and for the 4-day period, and then provide a link where you can get a full list of the voting locations. We are also entertaining the idea of doing a separate mailing that would just be a household mailing. It wouldn't be to individual voters, but a separate household mailing that lists all of the locations for that purpose.
We're getting an option also from seniors or from people who
Sure. Yeah, I think two other things I would add about that I think relate to that is, one is that we're doing a lot around branding, so the signage and like big flags and stuff. The idea is for the vote centers to be visible during that 11-day period. So if you're out and about in your community, that you'll see that. So again, I think over time, those should be consistent from election to election too. So I think that will help with that. The other thing is for areas that are harder to reach, we will also have a mobile vote center and pop-up vote center program where we can, if there's a place where we can't locate an 11-day or a 4-day vote center, but we know that there's a population of voters that's not likely to venture out beyond their particular geographic area, that we can schedule a mobile unit to go into that community, and we would market that separately because it would be a specific date and time. So we would do mailings and stuff like that around that as well. Yes, or yes, nearby or in the vicinity, yes.
or the intention to the voting information project again. That data in an open format so that lots of different places across the
Absolutely. So the data on locations and times, and both for vote centers as well as the drop-off locations, will be available through the voter information project, so other people can embed those in their own tools and apps. We also are looking at mobile apps that will tell you, using your location, will tell you where's the closest vote center to where I am right now, not necessarily closest to my home, but where's the closest vote center to where I am right now, and possibly, I don't want to overpromise on this, but possibly tell you the approximate wait time at that vote center too. So you can decide, okay, well, this one's close, but looks like there's a lot of people there, so maybe I can go to this one over here. So again, lots of creative opportunity there as well. Yes, well, the intention is for vote centers to become consistent from election to election. For March and November, that's easier to plan for because we know that there's a March election and we know there's a November election. So we will be looking for commitments for both of those elections. It gets a little more challenging when we have a special vacancy election or a special election that's called on a non-traditional election date. Our goal will be to maintain the consistency of those locations, because what we want is for people to think, oh yeah, libraries or community centers are places where they can just assume that voting will be available. That, as I said, that'll be a little trickier in the special elections, but our goal is to try and keep them as consistent as possible. Hi.
So in one of the recent community meetings that actually came up that I hadn't heard in any of the meetings, the curbside voting will it still be available to folks with the new system?
There will still be curbside voting options. Obviously, our goal is to have all of the vote centers to be fully accessible locations, but we will still have that option available for voters who need it as well. Yes, I think there's already an effort underway with Metro to, at least on election day, to provide free rides for people going to vote. Obviously, with the 4-day and 11-day period, we're going to push to expand that because we don't want everybody to come on Tuesday. We're also working on partnerships with Lyft and Uber that appear like they're willing to at least have a discount code so that it will reduce the rate, but also possibly to embed into their system so when you're on a ride with Uber or Lyft that you can actually see on your phone where the vote centers are along your trip, to use that as an opportunity to address that as well. Terry? Thank you, Terry. And I would just say right back to you, because it would not be possible if not for the access and the engagement that we've had with your organizations. One final thing I'll say, because I think hopefully you will all leave from today with the interest to go out and be part of the education around this. And one of the things we're learning as we go along when we have these community meetings that are advertised to be about vote center placement is not surprising. People want to talk about other things, so they want to talk about whether or not this was a good idea or a bad idea. And so one of the things that we've learned, and I think it's important as we have this dialogue, is we're now less than a year away from that March election. And I think we all need to be clear and kind of speak with the same voice that this is happening in March. It's not, is this going to happen? Are we thinking about doing it? This is happening. So that's what we want to talk about first. That doesn't mean we won't dialogue or have conversations about whether voter ID is good or whether vote harvesting is happening. I mean, those are real issues that people are reading about in the news and that they're concerned about, and we will have those dialogues. But I think it's important that we all recognize that this has been adopted and it will be the model going forth in March of 2020. So we need to be sure that we get that message out first and get them the information they need to have a successful voting experience in March, and then to continue the conversation on the other issues. Thank you very much.